What happens when the man who destroyed your life tries to do it all over again? Anna Lawson was invisible. After a bitter divorce left her with nothing but her broken dreams and a mountain of debt, her ex-husband Brent thought she was finished. He invited her to the year's most exclusive gala, not as a guest, but as a target, a broken toy he could parade in front of his new life. He wanted to shame her. He wanted to break her. What he didn't know was that the most powerful man in the room, the billionaire everyone was there to impress, had a secret. And that secret was Anna. The invitation was not an olive branch. It was a weapon. It arrived on a Tuesday, a day already gray with drizzle and the lingering smell of turpentine from Anna Lawson's struggling art restoration business. The envelope was obscenely heavy, thick cream cardstock that felt like armor. Her name, Ms. Anna Lawson, was written in sharp, precise calligraphy. It felt less like an invitation and more like a summons. The annual Titans Ball. A grotesque name for a grotesque display of wealth held this year in the Grand Cathedral Ballroom at the Plaza Hotel. Anna sank onto the worn stool in her tiny studio apartment, which doubled as her workshop. Her fingers stained with pigment and aching from delicate work traced the embossed logo of Walker Industries. Brent's company. His company. The one they had built together until he decided she was dead weight. "He can't be serious," she whispered, her breath fogging the cold window. Her phone buzzed. It was her best friend Sophie. "You got it, didn't you?" Sophie's voice was tight with anger. "I'm holding it," Anna replied, feeling the sharp edge of the cardstock. It was like a paper cut, a small, precise slice of pain. "You're throwing it in the incinerator, right, or at least the recycling bin?" "No, the shredder. Anna, you are not going." I don't know." "What is there to know? He's a monster. He took the house, the savings, he even fought you for the good knives. He's doing this to humiliate you, Anna. He wants to show off his new 22-year-old arm candy and point at you in what you can afford." Sophie was right. Anna looked around. Her life was a collection of half-repaired canvases that paid her pennies on the dollar for her expertise. After the divorce, Brent's lawyers had systematically portrayed her as a hobbyist, a dilettante with no real-world skills. Her art history degree, her specialized training in pre-Renaissance restoration, cute, Brent had called it in court. He had generously let her keep her little painting hobby. Now she lived in a 400-square-foot walk-up, her main client, a mysterious anonymous collector known only as Mr. G, who sent priceless artifacts via a white-glove courier service and paid 3 times her asking rate. Mr. G was the only reason she was still solvent. "He wants me to feel small, Soph," Anna said, her voice hardening. "He's been doing it for a decade. He did it every day of our marriage. He's still doing it. So don't let him. Don't go." "No," Anna said, a spark igniting in her chest. It was a cold, unfamiliar fire. "No, you're wrong. The only way to stop him from having this power is to show him he has none. I'm going." "Anna, what are you going to wear?" "The dress you wore to my cousin's wedding." Anna looked at her closet. Her options were a sensible navy sheath dress and, well, mostly just the sensible navy sheath dress. "I'll figure it out," she said, though her stomach was a knot of ice. "He expects me to hide. He expects me to be broken. I may be broke, Sophie, but I am not broken." The next 3 days were a blur. Anna cashed the check from Mr. G for her most recent project, restoring a 17th-century Dutch miniature. The payment was, as always, conspicuously large. It was enough. Enough for the rent, the utilities, and one more thing. She went not to a high-end boutique but to a curated consignment shop on the Upper East Side, one favored by socialites who only wore things once. There in the back she found it. A deep emerald green velvet gown. It was simple, long-sleeved, and devastatingly elegant. It fit her like a second skin. It wasn't new, but it was timeless. She paired it with the only good jewelry she had left, her grandmother's simple pearl earrings. Standing in her cramped bathroom, she hardly recognized the woman staring back. The stains were scrubbed from her hands, Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon, and her eyes looked like a soldier's. "You will not break me, Brent," she whispered to the mirror. "You will never, ever break me again." She took a taxi, not a limo. As she pulled up to the glittering facade of the plaza, she saw them. Brent Walker, broad-shouldered and smug in a custom tuxedo with a girl on his arm. Tiffany. She was impossibly tall, wearing a dress that seemed to be made of strategically placed red sequins and a lot of ambition. Anna paid the driver, took a deep breath, and stepped out onto the curb. The air was cold, but she felt nothing. She was a restorer. She knew how to handle fragile things, and tonight she would prove she was not one of them. The grand cathedral ballroom was designed to make mortals feel small. Vaulted ceilings dripped with crystal chandeliers, and the walls were adorned with gold leaf that shimmered like captured sunlight. A full orchestra played something classical and unobtrusive. The room was filled with the braying laughter of old money and the shark-like smiles of the new. Anna felt the familiar cold tentacles of imposter syndrome wrap around her. Her velvet dress, which had felt so elegant in her tiny apartment, now seemed dull and heavy. Every other woman was a riot of diamonds and designer labels. She was a sparrow in a flock of peacocks. She moved toward the bar, needing something to hold. A glass of sparkling water. Anything. "Well, well, well." The voice hit her like a physical blow. Brent. It was smoother than she remembered, oiled with success and arrogance. She turned. He was standing there, Tiffany plastered to his side, her red dress-clad hip jutting out. Brent's eyes raked over Anna, a slow, insulting appraisal. "Anna, darling," he said, his voice loud enough for the small cluster of investors nearby to hear. "I am so surprised you came. I thought the admission price might be a little steep for you. Oh, wait, I sent you a ticket, didn't I?" "A little charity," his friends chuckled. Anna kept her spine straight. "Hello, Brent. Tiffany." Tiffany just stared at her, her expression blank, as if trying to calculate Anna's net worth and coming up with zero. "Is that velvet?" Brent continued, leaning in conspiratorially. "How wonderfully vintage. You always were so frugal, weren't you, Annie?" He called her Annie, the name he used when he was about to belittle her, to gently correct her, to turn her passion into a punchline. "It's good to see you, Brent," Anna said, her voice as level as she could make it. "You're looking well." "I am well," he boomed. "In fact, I'm better than well. We're about to close the biggest deal of my career, a complete game changer. But you wouldn't know about that. How's the painting still playing with your little chemicals and brushes?" He turned to his group. "This is my ex-wife, Anna. She's an artist. She fixes old pictures. It's very sweet." The condescension was so thick she could have bottled it. Anna just smiled, a tiny, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Something like that." "Oh, Brent, don't be mean," Tiffany purred, running a red-taloned hand down his lapel. "She's trying. It's cute." Cute. The word that had defined her marriage. Brent's smile widened. He was enjoying this. This was the entire point. He had summoned her here to be the before picture to his after. "Actually, Anna," he said, grabbing 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter's tray, "I'm glad you're here. I wanted to thank you." He handed her a glass. She took it, her hand wary. "Thank me for what? For being so agreeable in the divorce. You understood your place. You knew you didn't contribute, so you didn't take. I respect that. It showed humility. And you do have so much to be humble about." The champagne in her hand trembled. The orchestra swelled. This was it, the public execution. "So a toast," Brent said, raising his glass. "To my past for knowing when to get out of the way of my future." He clinked his glass against hers a little too hard, and as he did, his other hand, the one holding his own glass, tilted. A torrent of cold, bubbling champagne cascaded down the front of Anna's dress. It was a perfect, deliberate waterfall of gold liquid. It soaked the velvet, turning the deep green to a sickly dark mess. It clung to her cold and sticky. Gasps, a few nervous titters. "Oh, goodness!" Brent exclaimed, his face a mask of fake horror. "Clumsy me, I am so sorry, Anna. Oh, look at that. It's completely ruined." Tiffany covered her mouth, but her eyes were dancing with undisguised glee. "It's just all over you," Brent said, stepping back. "Here." He grabbed a cocktail napkin from a tray and dabbed at her chest, a gesture that was both proprietary and insulting. Though, to be honest, it's probably an improvement. That color was a bit funereal, don't you think? Anna stood frozen. She was drenched. She was sticky. She could feel the eyes of everyone in that glittering, horrible room boring into her. She was the charity case, the clumsy ex-wife, the pathetic ruined before picture. The laughter in Brent's eyes was the final twist of the knife. She wanted to evaporate. She wanted to scream. Instead, she just put her wet glass down on a table. The champagne in her mouth had turned to ash. "Excuse me," she whispered, her voice choked. She turned and fled, pushing her way through the crowd of silent, judging faces. She didn't head for the main doors. She couldn't bear the walk of shame past the coat check. She saw a set of French doors and pushed through them, stumbling out onto a cold, dark terrace. The music faded, replaced by the sound of city traffic and the biting October wind. It whipped her hair from its chignon, stinging her wet face. She gripped the cold stone balustrade, her knuckles white, and finally let the tears come. They were hot, angry, and humiliating. He had won. Again. The terrace was a dark refuge. Below Central Park was a black, sprawling void, and the lights of the city seemed to mock her. Anna's sobs were raw, torn from her throat. She had been so stupid, so naive, thinking she could walk back into his world and survive. She had worn her dignity like armor, and he had shattered it with a single careless gesture. The velvet of her dress was heavy and cold, clinging to her skin like a shroud. She was wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to catch her breath, when a voice, deep and impossibly calm, cut through the night. "That was without question the most barbaric display I have witnessed since my last board of directors meeting." Anna spun around, mortified. She hadn't been alone. A man was standing in the deepest shadows by the far wall, almost invisible. All she could see was the silhouette of a tall, impeccably tailored suit and the red-orange glow of a lit cigarillo. He took a step forward into the faint light spilling from the ballroom. He was not what she expected. He wasn't one of Brent's loud, backslapping colleagues. He looked to be in his late 40s, with striking salt-and-pepper hair, a strong jaw, and eyes so dark and intelligent they seemed to absorb the light. He was impossibly handsome, but it was a quiet, severe handsomeness. He looked more like a scholar than a tycoon. He held out a perfectly folded white linen handkerchief. "He did that on purpose," the man stated. It wasn't a question. Anna took the handkerchief, her hand shaking. It was monogrammed. GP. "Yes," she whispered, her voice still thick. "He did." "Your ex-husband, I presume. Brent Walker." Anna dabbed at her face, startled. "You know him." "I know of him," the man said, his voice laced with a faint, unplaceable European accent. "He has been persistent in trying to get my attention. He seems to believe I am the key to his next great success." The man took another step, studying her, not with pity, but with a sharp, analytical curiosity. "You are Anna Lawson. You specialize in this conservation of 17th-century Dutch and Flemish oil miniatures. Your preferred solvent is a custom-balanced benzyl alcohol gel, and you believe that modern restorers are too quick to in-paint, sacrificing authenticity for aesthetics." Anna's blood ran cold. The tears stopped instantly. Who are you?" He smiled, a small, almost imperceptible lift at the corner of his mouth. He took a final draw from the cigarillo and then stubbed it out in a planter. Forgive me, we've been corresponding for 9 months, but we've never been formally introduced. He stepped fully into the light. I'm Gabriel Price. But you know me as Mr. G. Anna's knees went weak. She gripped the balustrade. Gabriel Price. Not just a Gabriel Price. The Gabriel Price. The reclusive, borderline mythical private equity kingmaker. The man Forbes had dubbed the Phantom of Wall Street. The man Brent had been obsessed with landing for the last 6 months. Brent's game-changing deal was an infrastructure project that needed a primary investor, and that investor was rumored to be Price. You're Mr. G, she stammered. But the pieces you sent, the Winter Duchess, the Vermeer sketch, are all part of my private collection, Gabriel finished. I inherited a great many things, Ms. Lawson, but my father had terrible taste in restorers. They were butchers. They smothered history. Then I read your graduate thesis published in a very obscure art journal, the one on pigment degradation, and I knew you were the one. He looked at the champagne-soaked mess of her dress. He doesn't know, does he, what you do? He calls it my hobby, Anna said, bitterness returning. His ignorance is staggering, Gabriel said flatly. I have been in that room for 2 hours, Ms. Lawson, surrounded by people who believe they are the titans of the universe, and the only true genius I have found is out here freezing and covered in cheap champagne. Anna didn't know what to say. The entire world had just tilted on its axis. The man who had been silently funding her survival was the man her ex-husband was desperate to impress. Gabriel looked back through the glass doors, his expression darkening as he saw Brent now holding court, regaling his friends with the story of Anna's humiliation. He wanted to make you a joke, Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency. He wanted to show his new vapid acquisition that he had discarded something worthless. He turned back to Anna. His dark eyes were intense. He made a catastrophic error. He assumed no one else would see your value, and in doing so he has just handed me the weapon I need to destroy him. Destroy him, Anna repeated, shocked. I do not suffer fools, Ms. Lawson, and I do not under any circumstances abide bullies. He humiliated a person I hold in the highest possible esteem. He will not finish the night on his feet. He checked his watch, a slim, elegant Patek Philippe. But first we must rectify this. He gestured to her dress. You cannot return to the battle in ruined armor. Return, Anna said, shaking her head. I'm not returning. I'm calling a cab and going home. No, Gabriel said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You are not. You will not give him the satisfaction of your retreat. You will give me the satisfaction of your return. He pulled out his phone and typed a single swift text. I have a suite upstairs, he said, pocketing the device. My assistant will have options waiting. We are going to fix this, and then you and I are going to walk back into that ballroom, and we are going to finish this. Anna looked at this man, this phantom who knew her preferred solvents and held her ex-husband's fate in his hands. The cold was gone. All she felt was a terrifying blazing heat. What are you going to do? Gabriel Price offered her his arm. I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. He wants to introduce his ex-wife to the world. I'm just going to amend the introduction. Gabriel led Anna not through the ballroom but through a private staff corridor. His movements were silent and economical. He swiped a black keycard at a service elevator and they ascended in complete silence, the only sound the expensive hum of the machinery. Mr. Price. Anna started wiping her palms on the still damp velvet. I don't understand. Why do all this? You're my client, but... Ms. Lawson, he interrupted gently as the elevator chimed. Your work, your mind, has been the only truly civilized conversation I've had in a year. Brent Walker and his ilk, they trade in concrete and steel. They build things. You save things. You save history. It's a far more valuable skill. The doors opened directly into a sprawling penthouse suite. It was larger than her entire apartment building. A fire roared in a marble fireplace, and the lights of the city glittered from floor-to-ceiling windows. A severe-looking woman with a tablet was waiting. "Mr. Price, Ms. Lawson." On a king-size bed laid out with impossible speed were 3 gowns. Not just gowns. Gowns. One was a classic black, another a startling silver, but it was the third that caught Anna's eye. It was a deep midnight blue, almost black, crafted from a heavy silk that seemed to drink the light. It was an Oscar de la Renta. "That one," Gabriel said, instantly confirming her choice. "There are shoes and accessories in the dressing room," the assistant said, already moving to dispose of the other 2 dresses. "You have 15 minutes. Mr. Price will be waiting." Anna was bustled into a bathroom that was a symphony of white marble. She washed the champagne from her skin, her hands still shaking. The dress fit as if it had been made for her. It was stark powerful and utterly sophisticated. In the dressing room she found a pair of simple Manolo Blahnik heels, and in a small velvet box, a Bulgari necklace, a single brilliant diamond suspended on a whisper-thin platinum chain. When she emerged, Gabriel Price was waiting by the window, a fresh pocket square in his suit. He turned, and for the first time his analytical gaze softened. He didn't just look. He saw. "Brent Walker," Gabriel said quietly, "is a fool." He held out the necklace. "May I?" Anna turned, her heart hammering as his fingers, warm and steady, brushed her neck to fasten the clasp. The diamond was cool against her skin. This is too much," she whispered. "It is precisely enough," he replied, his voice close to her ear. "It's a loan, unless, of course, you decide to keep it." He stepped back. "Now, the plan. It's very simple. Walker is chasing my investment. His entire project is leveraged on my signature. His board, his partners, they are all in that room tonight waiting for me to give the signal. And you're not going to—" "I am going to pivot," Gabriel said. "I am going to announce a new investment, a different one I find infinitely more compelling." "What investment?" Gabriel smiled. "The Price Lawson Foundation for Art Preservation, a $100 million endowment to fund and elevate the science of restoration with you as its head curator and director." Anna stopped breathing. "What? That's... I can't." "You can and you will. I've had my lawyers drafting the charter for months. I was waiting for the right moment to present it to you. Mr. Walker has quite rudely provided that moment." He held out his arm again. "Are you ready, Ms. Lawson?" "He will be ruined," she said, her voice a small stunned whisper. "Yes," Gabriel said, his face unreadable. "He will. He built his entire future on the assumption that you were worthless. It is only fitting that he be undone by the truth of your worth." Anna looked at the man before her. He wasn't a savior. He was an accelerant. He wasn't saving her. He was showing her the weapons she already possessed. She took a breath, not of champagne and ash, but of fire and steel. "My name," she said, "is Anna." "I know," he replied. She placed her hand on his arm. "Let's go." The walk from the private elevator back to the grand cathedral ballroom was the longest of Anna's life. Every step was a contradiction. Just an hour ago she had fled down this same corridor, a pathetic, sodden creature, her footsteps a frantic, humiliating retreat. Now she returned. The midnight blue silk of the gown whispered around her ankles a sound of pure liquid power. It was not a dress, it was armor. The diamond at her throat was not jewelry. It was a talisman, cool and heavy against her skin, a focal point of light. Beside her, Gabriel Price was a silent, solid wall of purpose. He did not rush. He walked with a deliberate, unhurried pace, and Anna matched him step for step. She felt his strength, his absolute control, and she drew from it. This was not a walk of shame. This was a procession. They reached the grand archway of the ballroom. The doors were thrown open, spilling a wave of golden light and the sound of a jaunty waltz into the hall. The braying laughter and clinking glasses were a wall of noise. They paused, not from hesitation but for a single theatrical beat. Gabriel understood optics. He understood the power of an entrance. Then they stepped through the arch into the light. If her first entrance had been invisible, this one was a thunderclap. Or, rather, it was the opposite, a sonic vacuum. The orchestra's waltz faltered, one violin screeching into the void before it too fell silent. The clinking of glasses stopped. The braying laughter died in a dozen throats. A physical wave of silence rippled outward from the doorway as one by one the titans of industry turned. And then the whispers, a sibilant rush like dry leaves skittering across marble. "Who is that? My God, is that Walker's ex, the one he spilled champagne on? It can't be. Look at her. That necklace. Is that the Bulgari azure I thought it was in a vault in Geneva? She's with him. She's with Gabriel Price." Anna felt the heat of 100 stares. They were no longer looks of pity or dismissal. They were looks of shock, of envy, of sudden sharp calculation. In her old life this would have undone her. But the woman who had fled to the terrace was gone. Anna drew on the same meticulous discipline she used to restore a 17th century canvas. She kept her eyes forward, her spine a steel rod. Her chin was high. She was not there for them. She was on a mission. Her gaze was fixed on a point in the center of the room, a target. Brent. He was oblivious. He was holding court with a small group of older, serious-looking men, the board. He had his back to the door, a fresh glass of champagne in his hand, his voice loud as he regaled them with some anecdote. He was the king of his small, self-made castle. But Tiffany standing beside him was a predator. She sensed the shift in the room's atmosphere before he did. Her painted-on smile froze. She looked up, her eyes scanning the crowd, and then she saw them. Her face, a mask of bored, practiced glamour, collapsed. The smile vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed gape. Her eyes, wide with confusion, darted from Anna's face to the impossible dress, to the blazing diamond, and then with dawning horror to the man whose arm Anna held. Her red-taloned hand gripped Brent's arm, pinching him hard. "Brent," she hissed. "What?" He snapped, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it?" He turned, and his world stopped. It was a masterpiece of a man's psyche imploding in real time. First, pure animal confusion. Who is this woman? Then dawning, sickening recognition. Anna. And finally pure, unadulterated, pants-wetting shock as his brain processed the impossible. His Anna. With Gabriel Price. His eyes darted frantic and white. From Anna's face, calm, cold, and beautiful, to the diamond at her throat, to the hand she had resting possessively on Price's arm. He looked at her, dress no longer a damp rag of velvet, but a shimmering column of couture. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking chalky and sick under the warm ballroom lights. Gabriel did not pause. He did not wait for Brent to recover. He began to walk. He navigated the room as if he owned it. And the crowd, this collection of the most powerful people in the city, parted for them like the Red Sea. They created a silent, staring corridor, a pathway leading directly to the epicenter of Brent's humiliation. Anna walked with him, her steps measured. She felt like a queen. No, she felt like a restorer who had finally meticulously stripped away the grime to reveal the masterpiece beneath. Brent was frozen, a statue of his own arrogance. He was sweating now, a visible sheen on his forehead. He saw his boss, Mr. Henderson, watching him, his expression sharp and questioning. He saw his investors. He had to regain control. He had to frame this. As they stopped before him, Brent blundered forward, forcing a laugh that sounded like a cough. "Mr. Price, sir," he stammered, his voice too high. You made it. I was worried. And I see you've, met my ex-wife." It was his fatal error. He tried to claim them both, to frame it as his introduction, to put Anna back in the box he had built for her. He even fatally turned to Anna. "Anna, darling," he said, his voice a grotesque parody of their married life, "you really shouldn't be bothering Mr. Price. He's a very busy man. I'm sure he'd like to talk business now." He waved a hand, a nervous, dismissive gesture as if shooing a fly. It was the most condescending and most desperate act of his life. A hot, sharp retort died on Anna's lips. She felt Gabriel's subtle upward pressure on her hand. "Not yet. Let me." Gabriel Price stopped. He stood directly in front of Brent, close enough that Brent, who was not a small man, had to crane his neck slightly to look up at him. Gabriel didn't speak. He simply watched him. He let Brent drown in the silence he had created. He let him unravel under the weight of 100 staring eyes. Finally, when Brent looked like he was about to physically vibrate apart, Gabriel spoke. His voice was not loud. It was quiet. It was clear. And it carried sharp as a shard of ice to every corner of the now tomb-like room. "Mr. Walker." The use of his name was a slap. "I am indeed a busy man, which is why I am so bothered." The silence that fell over the Grand Cathedral ballroom was not merely a lack of sound. It was a physical presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on every guest. The orchestra had long since faltered into a discordant halt, the musicians' frozen bows hovering uselessly over strings. Every eye, every watt of attention in that glittering, opulent room was locked onto the four people in the center: a terrified, sweating Brent, a furious, wide-eyed Tiffany, a regal, reborn Anna, and a lethal, utterly calm Gabriel Price. "You wanted to thank your past, Mr. Walker," Gabriel continued, his quiet voice slicing through the stillness with surgical precision. "You wanted to toast to what you left behind. You stood here in front of your colleagues and your superiors, and you celebrated your future by attempting to destroy the person who helped you build your present." Gabriel's gaze was unyielding, pinning Brent in place. "You seem to be under a fundamental misunderstanding of what and who you discarded. You thought you were casting off dead weight. You thought you were silencing a hobbyist. You thought you were making a joke." Brent opened his mouth, a desperate, dry croak emerging. "Sir, Mr. Price, it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. She is..." Gabriel interrupted, his voice dropping an octave. "Your catastrophic error in judgment." The words hung in the air. This was business language. This was the language Mr. Henderson, Brent's boss, understood. Henderson's face, which had been confused, now sharpened with sudden cold dread. Gabriel turned a subtle, deliberate movement that drew every eye with him. He faced Anna, and the cold, analytical mask he wore for the world seemed to dissolve, replaced by something warm and profoundly respectful. He took Anna's hand, not her arm, her hand. He didn't lift it to his lips, not yet. He simply held it, lacing his fingers with hers in a gesture of unmistakable possession of partnership. He presented their clasped hands to the room as if it were a new signed treaty. Anna's heart was a drum against her ribs. She felt the squeeze of his hand a silent command. "Stand with me. This is it." Gabriel turned his gaze back to the room, sweeping it over the investors, the board members, and finally landing with crushing finality on Brent Walker. "You may know her as your ex-wife." He paused, letting the title hang in the air, dripping with all the condescension Brent had loaded it with. "But I and the rest of the world will know her differently." He lifted their joined hands, slightly a declaration. "Gentlemen, ladies, I am honored to be the first to introduce you to Anna Lawson, my partner." A ripple of shock. Partner Brent's eyes widened. Mr. Henderson leaned forward. This was a business alliance. The future director of the $100 million Price Lawson Foundation for Art Preservation. A collective audible gasp. 100 million. Her name, the hobby, was now a global foundation. Brent's face, which had been pale, began to turn a sickly grayish green. He was choking. He understood now the nature of Mr. G. He understood the checks that had kept her afloat. And Gabriel added, his voice ringing with a final devastating clarity. My fiancée. Fiancée. The word dropped into the silence like a diamond dropped into a chasm. It was absolute. It was indefensible. It was the end of Brent Walker. Anna's shock was so profound she almost laughed. Her eyes snapped to Gabriel's. He gave her hand another infinitesimal squeeze, his expression never wavering. Trust me. Brent Walker's face imploded. It was a physical collapse. His arrogance, his confidence, his entire carefully constructed world. It all shattered in that single instant. His jaw went slack, his eyes bulged, and a visible sheen of cold sweat broke out on his forehead, matting his hair. He looked like a man who had just seen his own ghost. Tiffany, who had been clinging to him, let out a small strangled squeak as if she'd been electrocuted. She physically recoiled her hand, ripping away from his arm as if he were suddenly radioactive diseased. Her face contorted not with sympathy, but with pure, undiluted disgust. He was no longer a provider. He was a liability. It was Mr. Henderson, the chairman, who was the first to react. He was a shark. He saw his company's deal, his reputation, and his stock price all flashing before his eyes, circling the drain with Brent. He abandoned his subordinate instantly. Mr. Price! Good heavens! Henderson bustled forward, his arm outstretched, his face split in a wide, desperate, beaming smile. He completely ignored Brent, pushing past him to shake Gabriel's hand while simultaneously beaming at Anna. Ms. Lawson. A fiancé. How wonderful. My deepest, deepest congratulations. This is splendid news. He turned, glaring at Brent with murder in his eyes, but his voice remained grotesquely cheerful. Brent, you dog, you never told us your ex-wife was engaged to Mr. Price? Keeping secrets, were we? The lie was so blatant, so desperate that it was almost comical. He was trying to give Brent an out, to pretend this was all part of the plan. Gabriel did not let him. He didn't know, Gabriel said smoothly, accepting Henderson's handshake while keeping his other hand firmly, possessively clasped with Anna's. Brent and we haven't had a chance to discuss my personal life, or for that matter, my business. This was the killing blow. The pivot from personal to professional was swift and merciless. Mr. Price, the deal, Brent whispered. His voice was a dry, rasping rattle. The infrastructure project. Our partners. We're set to sign. Gabriel corrected him. The word was cold. We were set to sign. But you see, Mr. Henderson, I have a strict, inviolable policy. Henderson, still holding his smile, was now sweating almost as much as Brent. Sir, I do not partner with men who lack judgment. And a man, Gabriel's eyes raked over Brent, who would so profoundly misjudge the value of the assets and the people in his life. A man who would publicly humiliate the most brilliant mind in this room. A man who would throw champagne on my fiancée. He let that sink in, connecting Brent's personal cruelty directly to his professional incompetence. Well, that man, Mr. Henderson, demonstrates a catastrophic, unforgivable lack of judgment. Walker Industries has become a liability I will not underwrite. The deal is off. Effective immediately. Mr. Henderson's fake smile vanished, replaced by a mask of purple apoplectic rage. He turned on Brent. Walker! He roared, his voice booming across the ballroom. You're an idiot. You're finished. But, Mr. Henderson? I can fix this, Brent sputtered, holding his hands out in a pathetic, pleading gesture. Fix it. You just cost this firm a $10 billion deal. You are done at Walker Industries. Clean out your desk. Walker. You are done. He stabbed a finger at a nearby security guard. Get him out of here. Brent just stood there, a hollowed-out shell in a custom tuxedo. He looked at Anna, his eyes finally landing on her. They were pleading, full of terror and a childlike, pathetic disbelief. "How could you do this to me?" they screamed. "You were nobody." Anna looked back at him. She searched inside herself for any lingering feeling. Pity, anger, even triumph. She found none. There was just nothing. A void. He was just as she had hoped, finally and completely powerless. He had ceased to exist for her. "Now," Gabriel said, raising his voice to the room which was buzzing with frantic, excited whispers. He smiled, a genuine warm smile directed only at Anna. "If you'll excuse us, my fiancée and I were just about to celebrate." He turned, tugging her gently toward the dance floor. He nodded to the terrified orchestra conductor. "And I believe, my dear, that this orchestra plays waltzes." The conductor jolted into action, immediately raised his baton. As Gabriel and Anna walked away, leaving the wreckage of Brent's life behind them, a final pathetic sound cut through the air. It was Tiffany, her voice sharp, cold, and carrying. "Don't you touch me, Brent. You're a loser." A sound followed, the sharp, definitive shatter of a champagne flute hitting the marble floor. The reign of Brent Walker was over. The orchestra, jolted from its stupor by the conductor's frantic wave, began to play. The melody was a soft, hesitant waltz, as if the music itself was afraid to intrude on the scene. The vast parquet dance floor was a deserted island in the middle of the glittering ballroom. Gabriel led Anna to its center. The other guests, a silent, staring ocean of diamonds and tuxedos, formed a wide, respectful circle around them, watching as if witnessing a coronation. He placed one hand on her waist, a light but firm pressure that grounded her. She rested her hand on his shoulder, feeling the fine wool of his suit, the solid strength beneath it. The silk of her gown whispered around her legs. The diamond at her throat felt like a small, cold star against her skin. The entire world, which had been spinning in a vortex of humiliation and terror, suddenly contracted to this single point. His hand in hers. His dark, steady eyes on hers. They began to move. It was a slow, graceful turn. Anna, who had felt so clumsy, so exposed, so utterly broken, just an hour before now, felt anchored. She was no longer a victim fleeing in a ruined dress. She was here in the eye of the storm she had created, held by the man who had summoned the thunder. "You're shaking," he murmured. His voice was for her alone a low vibration that seemed to travel directly from his chest to hers. "You told them I was your fiancée." She whispered back, her voice barely a breath. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of stunned, profound disbelief. She was still processing the sound of the word the way it had landed in the room, detonating Brent's life. "I did," he replied, his expression unreadable as he guided her in another smooth rotation. "You also announced a $100 million foundation." The number felt absurd, impossible to say aloud. "I did." They danced in silence for a few more steps, the music swelling around them. The bubble of their solitude was absolute. Anna's mind was racing, trying to separate the tactical from the real. "Which one was the lie, Mr. Price?" "Gabriel," he corrected her, his voice gentle but firm. "My name is Gabriel." He paused, pulling her fractionally closer as they turned. "And that's the interesting part. Neither of them has to be." Anna's heart, which had been hammering a frantic rhythm of survival, skipped a beat and settled into a new heavy cadence. Neither of them has to be. The sheer breathtaking audacity of the statement. She looked into his eyes, searching for a hint of guile of a tycoon's manipulative play. She found none. She found only a startling, sober sincerity. I don't understand," she said, and it was the truest thing she'd ever said. "Anna," he said, his gaze intense, "the foundation is real. It is as real as the Vermeer sketch you restored for me." He saw the question in her eyes and answered it. "I've had my legal team chartering the Price Lawson Foundation for months. I was going to offer it to you next week in a quiet, boring office. This just seemed more efficient. Your work, your mind? It's a resource that should be shared with the world, not hidden in a walk-up working for scraps." $100 million. A foundation with her name on it. The work she had dreamed of, funding research, saving collections, training a new generation of restorers. It was the validation of her entire life, the life Brent had called a cute little hobby. The tears she had refused to shed in humiliation now pricked at her eyes in overwhelming, staggering gratitude. As for the other, he continued, his voice softening, that was an improvisation. A tactical maneuver. A tactical maneuver, she repeated, a small, shaky smile finally touching her lips. I saw him put his hands on you, Gabriel said, and for a fleeting instant his tone hardened into something cold and dangerous. I saw him douse you in champagne as if you were nothing. I wanted to make him understand in language he could not possibly misinterpret that you were not nothing, that you were protected, that you were in fact priceless. He paused, his self-assessment precise. It was a primitive, possessive impulse. My apologies. But it was, I calculated, effective. Yes, Anna said, thinking of the pulverized look on Brent's face. It was. However, he continued, spinning her gently as the waltz reached its crescendo, as I stood there with your hand in mine announcing it to that room of vipers, it didn't feel like a lie. It felt like a prophecy. They stopped dancing, though the music continued to swirl around them. They just stood in the center of the floor, the sole focus of hundreds of people. I have spent the last 9 months reading your emails, your notes, your analyses on pigment and canvas, he said, his voice dropping lower. I felt I knew you. I fell in love with your mind, Anna Lawson. Your precision, your passion, your absolute refusal to compromise on the truth of your work. Tonight, seeing your strength, seeing you face that animal and not break, I realized I was tired of corresponding with A.L. I want to know Anna. I want to partner with her in all things. This was it, the real proposal hidden beneath the public one. It wasn't about a dress or a diamond. It was about her mind. He wasn't saving a damsel. He was offering an alliance to an equal. Anna looked over his shoulder. The tableau of the room was frozen in her memory. Brent was gone, vanished in erasure. Mr. Henderson was deep in frantic, red-faced crisis talks with his partners. Tiffany, she noted with a distant sense of irony, was already laughing with a different, younger-looking man by the bar. The world had already forgotten Brent Walker. He hadn't been destroyed by a billionaire. He had been destroyed by his own fatal arrogance. He had been destroyed by the worthless woman he had thrown away. She brought her focus back to Gabriel, to this impossible, brilliant, and lethally decisive man who saw her, truly saw her. The foundation, Anna said, her voice clear and strong. I accept. It's the work I've always dreamed of doing. Good, he said, a genuine warmth spreading in his eyes. And as for the other proposition, Gabriel weighted, his expression unreadable, giving her the space to make her own choice. Anna smiled. It was a real smile, a true smile, one that started in her chest and rose to her eyes, lighting her entire face. I think you should ask me again, properly, when we are not the center of a corporate execution and I am not wearing your diamond. A slow, appreciative smile transformed his own face, chasing away the last of the shadows. Fair enough, Miss Lawson. Anna, she corrected him. Anna, he agreed. Tomorrow, breakfast. My suite, 10 a.m. We will discuss the charter and other things. It's a date, she said. He took her hand, the one he was holding, and this time he did raise it to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a gesture of old-world charm that felt less like romance and more like a sealing of an oath, a mark of profound respect. Now, he said, turning with her to face the room, I believe we are being congratulated. The spell was broken. The music swelled into a triumphant crescendo, and the crowd, seeing that the crisis was over and a new power couple had been anointed, surged forward. Mr. Price, Ms. Lawson, wonderful news. Congratulations, simply marvelous. Anna darling, you look breathtaking. We must have lunch. Faces that had been blank with pity or sharp with judgment just an hour ago were now wreathed in fawning, desperate smiles. Anna stood tall, the diamond at her throat blazing under the light. She kept her hand linked firmly with Gabriel's. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer the before picture. She was the future. She was a restorer, and she had just reclaimed her own life from the layers of dirt and grime. For the first time, she was the one holding the brush, and the canvas was entirely her own. Anna Lawson walked into that party as a ghost, a victim. Her ex-husband thought he could break for his own amusement. She walked out as a leader, a fiancée, and the head of her own $100 million foundation. Brent didn't just lose a deal. He lost his career, his reputation, and his power, all because he fundamentally misunderstood the value of the woman he cast aside. He tried to shame her, but he only succeeded in revealing his own worthlessness. Karma, as they say, has a way of settling all debts, and sometimes it does it in a packed ballroom with the whole world watching. What did you think of Anna's incredible comeback? Have you ever seen someone so spectacularly underestimate the person they hurt? Let us know your favorite part of this story in the comments below. We read every single one. If you love stories where karma delivers the final crushing blow, be sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a single story of justice being served.
The world knew Damian Rose as the King of Wall Street, a billionaire who had everything: the penthouse, the jet, and the perfect quiet wife, Ainsley. But in the glittering world of New York's elite, quiet is another word for invisible. He mocked her simple clothes, humiliated her at glittering galas, and carried on a brazen affair with a supermodel. He told his friends she was practical, uninspired, and not the face of a brand. What he didn't know is that while he was chasing his next billion, his plain wife was quietly building an empire. And at the most exclusive event of the year, he was about to find out exactly who she was. The crystal chandeliers of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Great Hall dripped light onto the shoulders of New York's 1%. It was the annual Winter Wish Gala, the most exclusive high-stakes charity event of the season, and Damian Rose was in his element. Damian was a man carved from granite and ambition. His company, Rose Capital, didn't build things. It acquired them, stripped them for parts, and sold the scraps for a profit. He was a corporate raider in a $20,000 Tom Ford tuxedo, and he moved through the room with the predatory grace of a shark. And beside him, like a small, plain dinghy tethered to a super yacht, was his wife, Ainsley. Ainsley Rose was to the glittering society of Manhattan a curiosity. She wasn't ugly, but she was neutral. Tonight, while other women were encased in feathers, sequins, and sculptural masterpieces by Schiaparelli, Ainsley wore a simple, sleeveless black column dress. It was timeless, perfectly tailored, and utterly devoid of flash. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple chignon, and her only jewelry was a pair of pearl earrings, the same ones she wore almost every day. "Damian, darling," a voice like cut glass trilled. Damian turned, his face splitting into a brilliant white smile. "Serafina, you look explosive." Serafina Croft, a model whose fame was built on her Instagram feed, and her proximity to powerful men, slithered up to him. She was wearing a crimson gown that seemed to be held on by sheer willpower and double-sided tape. She kissed Damian, leaving a smear of gloss on his cheek, a gesture that was far too intimate. Ainsley stood half a step behind her husband, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She didn't flinch. She didn't scowl. She simply existed. And Ainsley, Serafina said, her eyes raking over the simple black dress with manufactured pity. How classic. Is that vintage? It's just a dress, Serafina, Ainsley said, her voice soft. Of course it is, darling, Serafina purred, linking her arm through Damien's. Damien, you must come and say hello to the senator. He's dying to talk about the Hamptons merger. Damien, who had already forgotten Ainsley was there, allowed himself to be pulled away. Business, my love, he murmured, not looking back. He didn't mean Ainsley. Ainsley was left alone at the edge of the throng. This was her life. She was the rose appendage, the quiet, unobtrusive +1. She watched her husband laugh, his hand resting possessively on the small of Serafina's back. She saw the photographer's bulbs flash, capturing Damien and Serafina, the power couple. Ainsley was just out of frame as always. She found their table number 1 front and center. She sat a ghost at the feast and took a sip of water. Later, Damien returned, flushed with champagne and self-importance. He sat beside her, leaning in close. Ainsley could smell Serafina's perfume on him, a cloying, sugary scent called scandal. God, I wish you'd try, he hissed, his voice low and vicious, beneath the string quartet. Ainsley turned to him, her gaze level. Try what, Damien? To look the part. Look at you. You're my wife, Ainsley. You're supposed to be an asset, not wallpaper. Look at Serafina. That's a woman who understands her value. That's a brand. I see, Ainsley said. No, you don't. He scoffed, adjusting his cuffs. I'm closing the biggest deal of my life, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition of a new European luxury fund. These people, they don't want practical. They want aspirational. They want power. And I look over and my wife is dressed like the help. The words struck as they were intended to. A younger Ainsley would have cried. The Ainsley of today simply nodded, folding her napkin in her lap. I'm sorry I disappoint you. Just stay here, he said, standing up. Don't wander off. I have to go network. Try not to look so beige. He left again, a planet returning to his true sun, Serafina. Ainsley watched him go. She sat at the table for precisely 10 more minutes, maintaining the placid, agreeable mask of Mrs. Rose. Then she quietly picked up her small, unbranded clutch. She stood. No one noticed. The security guard at the main entrance, who recognized her, looked surprised. Leaving so early. Mrs. Rose, I'm not feeling well, she said softly. He nodded, opening the grand door. Shall I get the Rose car for you? No, thank you, Ainsley said. I'll just take a cab. She stepped out of the museum's bubble of light and into the cold, sharp reality of the New York night. She walked past the line of waiting Maybachs and Bentleys, raising a hand to hail a yellow taxi. As it pulled away from the curb, she looked back at the glittering facade of the Met. She saw Damien through the window, laughing, a glass of champagne in one hand, his other arm wrapped around Serafina. He hadn't even noticed she was gone. Where to, lady? The cabbie asked. Ainsley's face, which had been passive and soft all night, hardened. Her posture straightened. A cold, clear light entered her eyes. Soho, she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its breathy, wifely quality, and gaining a new, sharp authority. Corner of Green and Prince. The taxi merged into the traffic, taking her away from the life Damien thought she lived, and toward the one she actually did. The transformation had already begun. The Rose penthouse on Park Avenue was 10,000 square feet of cold, white, minimalist isolation. It was Damien's taste. He called it clean. Ainsley called it a mausoleum. The cab didn't go there. It pulled up to a discreet cast-iron building in Soho, one that still looked like a 19th-century warehouse. Ainsley paid the driver, slipped out, and entered a private code into a brass panel by the freight elevator. The elevator opened directly into a sprawling top-floor loft. But this was no home. It was a high-tech, high-security design studio. Where the penthouse was cold and white, this space was warm and alive. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling pinboard, covered in sketches, fabric swatches, and leather samples. Another was lined with industrial shelves, holding 3D-printed prototypes and sculpted lasts. In the center of the room, a team of 3 people was huddled around a massive computer monitor, arguing in rapid French. They all stopped and turned as Ainsley entered. "Anya." "Thank God," said a sharp-dressed man with a silver goatee. This was Javier, her COO, and the only person in the world who knew her full story. Ainsley pulled the pins from her chignon, and her hair fell to her shoulders. She was no longer Ainsley. In this room, she was Anya, or as the fashion world knew her, simply I. "Javier, status two," she said, shedding her black dress as she walked, revealing a simple slip underneath. She tossed the dress onto a chair. "Burn that." "The argent clasp is still not right," Javier said, gesturing to the monitor. "The tension is wrong. It snaps, but it doesn't sing. And the tannery in Milan sent the wrong calf skin. It's half a shade too warm." Ainsley strode over her bare feet, silent on the polished concrete floor. She examined the 3D rendering of the handbag clasp. "It's the spring. The coiling is too loose. Tell the engineers to increase the torque by 0.5 newtons. And as for the calf skin, reject it. Tell them if they can't match the Pantone, I'll buy the entire tannery and fire their head of quality control." "Yes, Anya." "The show is in 3 weeks. There is no room for too warm." She thought. This was Aura, the most exclusive, enigmatic, and explosive luxury brand to emerge in a decade. Aura didn't do influencer marketing. It didn't have a flashy logo. It didn't even have a public-facing designer. It was a ghost. Aura was built on anonymity and an obsessive, ruthless pursuit of perfection. Its signature handbag, the Argent, cost $40,000, and the waitlist was rumored to be longer than Hermès. The brand's owner was known only as A recluse, rumored to be an eccentric European aristocrat. That recluse was currently pulling on a pair of old jeans and a black cashmere sweater, her face illuminated by the glow of the workstation. Ainsley had started Iora 8 years ago, 2 years into her marriage. She had used a small inheritance from her grandmother, money Damien had dismissed as pin money, and told her to buy a nice painting with. Instead, she had anonymously invested it. She, an art history major, with a minor in material science, had seen a gap in the market. The old luxury brands were getting tired, lazy, coasting on their heritage. The new brands were just loud, empty hype. Ainsley wanted to create something that was both timeless craft, married to cutting-edge technology. She started with a single bag, one she designed and commissioned from a master artisan in Florence. It took a year. She sold it to a single discerning client, then another. She built her brand one whisper at a time. She kept it a secret from Damien initially, as a form of protection. Early in their marriage, she had shown him a sketch for a high-tech travel bag. He had glanced at it and laughed. "Stick to the charity lunches, sweetheart. Leave the business to me." That laugh had forged her armor. She created a firewall that would be the envy of the CIA. Anya had a separate legal identity. Aura was owned by a blind trust based in Luxembourg, which was in turn owned by a holding company in Switzerland. Ainsley Rose, didn't exist in Aura's world, and A didn't exist in Damien's. Javier watched her work. She was relentless. She examined every stitch, every seam, every single line of code for their new e-commerce site. This plain woman, who her husband thought was too simple to dress herself, was currently micromanaging the development of a proprietary alloy for a watch bezel. "The gala?" Javier asked quietly, handing her a strong black coffee. "As expected," Ainsley said, not looking up from a leather hide she was inspecting with a jeweler's loupe. Serafina Croft. She was wearing crimson, tacky. And Damien. Ainsley finally paused. She looked at Javier, and for a second the mask of A slipped, revealing the wife. "He called me beige wallpaper." Javier's face tightened. "He's a fool. A loud, arrogant, ignorant fool." "Yes," Ainsley said, the mask sliding back into place. "But he's a useful fool. His obsession with status is the best marketing I could ask for." She turned back to the pinboard. It was covered in sketches for Aura's first-ever public runway show, scheduled for Paris Fashion Week. The industry was hysterical with anticipation. Vogue had dedicated an entire column to guessing A's identity. "He humiliated me tonight, Javier," Ainsley said, her voice very quiet. "He did it in front of people he wants to impress. He made me small so he could feel big." "Anya, change the finale look," she said, her voice like ice. She grabbed a charcoal pencil and strode to a fresh sheet of paper. "I'm scrapping the velvet gown. I want architecture. I want power." Her hands moved with a feverish, controlled energy. A design appeared on the paper, a severe, powerful, breathtakingly elegant suit. It was minimalist, but the cut was so precise it looked like a weapon. "This," she said, tapping the sketch. "This is the final look. Get the atelier in Milan started tonight." Javier nodded, his eyes wide. He knew what he was seeing. It wasn't just a new design. It was a declaration of war. "He thinks I'm wallpaper," Ainsley whispered, brushing charcoal dust from her fingers. "It's time to show him what the house is made of." For the next 2 weeks, Damien Rose was a storm of ambition. The European deal was all he could talk about. He paced the white penthouse, his phone seemingly fused to his ear, shouting at his analysts. "I don't care what it costs. Get me a meeting," he yelled, loosening his tie. Ainsley sat on the sofa reading a book on Byzantine art. She looked up, her face a mask of mild inquiry. "Is everything all right, Damien?" "It's this Aura brand," he snapped, throwing his jacket onto a white Eames chair. "It's the keystone. The whole luxury fund deal pivots on it. The holding company I'm targeting, Lux Eterna, is small, but their one asset is a minority stake in Aura. If I can acquire Lux Eterna, I get a seat at Aura's table. And Aura is the Holy Grail." Ainsley placed a bookmark in her book. "Why them?" Damien laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "Why, Ainsley, don't ought to be dense. Aura isn't a brand, it's a religion. Their profit margins are 90%. They have zero debt. They have zero marketing spend. It's all word of mouth. They are, and I quote my analyst, the most perfectly executed luxury concept in a century. This A person, they're not a designer. They're a killer. They're what I would be if I made handbags." He was mesmerized, in love with the idea of this ruthless, anonymous founder. "The problem, so," he continued, pouring himself a large glass of Macallan 25, "is that A is a ghost, a phantom. No one knows who they are. They communicate through one lawyer in Zurich. My team has been digging for 6 months. Nothing. It's the most secure corporate structure I've ever seen. Perhaps they simply value their privacy. Ainsley offered. Privacy is a shield for the weak, Damien shot back. This is a power play. A is making the market beg. It's genius. And now they're finally having a runway show in Paris. Everyone is going to be there. And I just got my invitation. He held up his phone, displaying the email. The invitation was stark black, with a single silver A. This is it, he said, his eyes gleaming. This is where I close. I'll be in the front row. When this A finally shows their face, I'll be the first one to shake their hand. I'm taking the jet. You can stay here. Oh, Ainsley said, feigning mild disappointment. I wouldn't want to get in the way of your business, Damien. Besides, Paris is so busy that time of year. Exactly. It's not for you, he said, patting her on the shoulder, a gesture one gives to a dog. You wouldn't enjoy it. It's all fashion. I understand, she said. What she didn't say was that she had received her own invitation because she had designed it. The following week, Damien was consumed with preparation. He was on the phone constantly with Serafina. Ainsley, sitting in the adjoining library, could hear his side of the conversation. Yes, of course you're coming with me. I want you in the front row right beside me. Wear that red dress, the one you wore in Dubai. No, Ainsley's not coming. She thinks she's visiting her sister in Seattle or something. It's fine. A beat of silence. What? No, she has no idea. She doesn't even know what aura is. She probably thinks it's a new kind of yogurt. He laughed, and Serafina's high-pitched giggle echoed through the speaker. Ainsley closed her laptop. On the screen was the final seating chart for the Paris show. She'd put Damien in the front row, as he'd expected. She'd also seated him directly across from the Vogue photographer's pit. He would be perfectly illuminated. She had also, just an hour ago, finalized the largest business deal of her life. Her holding company, the one in Switzerland, had just completed a reverse acquisition. Damien thought he was buying Lux Eterna to get a piece of aura. But Ainsley's company had just bought Lux Eterna, the very fund Damien was targeting out from under him. The trap was set. Damien was so busy trying to get a seat at the table, he never bothered to find out who owned the house. Javier, Ainsley said into her own secure phone. It's done. The Lux Eterna deal is closed, Javier's voice replied. We own his target. He's officially pitching to us now. And he has no idea. None. His analysts are still sending documents to the old board. The old board is, per our agreement, forwarding them straight to my team. By the way, his bid is insulting. He's lowballing us by about 500 million. Ainsley looked out of the window at the grey New York skyline. He's arrogant. He thinks they're desperate, and he's the savior. Let him keep thinking it. Right up until the show, I want him confident. I want him preening. See you in Paris, Anya, Javier said. See you in Paris, Ainsley replied. She walked back into the living room where Damien was admiring himself in the mirror, practicing his powerful smile. Damien, she said, her voice soft and wifely. What? I've packed your black tie suit, and I put in those new cufflinks you like. Good. Good, he said, distracted. You'll be fine here, right? Order whatever you want. Of course, dear, Ainsley said, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle on his jacket. You just go and get your deal. He smiled a genuine smug smile. I always do. The Rose private jet, a new Gulfstream G800, cut through the sky toward Paris. Inside, Damien Rose and Serafina Croft were drinking Dom Perignon. Serafina was filming everything for her Instagram story. The cashmere blankets, the caviar, Damien's profile, as he looked pensively out the window. "Dami, you're so tense," she cooed, draping herself over his seat. "You should be celebrating we're going to the Aura show." "It's not we, Serafina. It's me," Damien corrected, not unkindly. "You're my guest. This is the biggest night of my career. That's all. Once I acquire this brand, you can have all the free handbags you want." "But what if A is like ugly?" Serafina mused, pouting into her phone camera. "It's probably some old bitter woman." "I don't care if A is a three-headed dog," Damien said. "I'm not buying their looks. I'm buying their genius, their ruthlessness." He looked at his phone, checking his email for the 10th time. A new message from his lead analyst. Subject Lux Eterna Comms. "Sir, we've hit a snag. The board at Lux Eterna has suddenly gone dark. The data room has been closed." Damien's blood ran cold. "What? They're citing a material change in circumstance. They say all future correspondence must be routed through a new legal firm in Zurich. This is, irregular." "Damn it!" Damien slammed his fist on the polished wood. "What, darling, did we hit turbulence?" Serafina asked, annoyed at the interruption. "Business," he snapped. "The sellers are playing games." He quickly typed a reply. "Get me the head of that Zurich firm. Now! I don't care what time it is. I am not losing this deal." He was rattled. For the first time, he felt a flicker of doubt. This A was slippery. This whole operation was. He landed at Le Bourget Airport, a storm cloud of anxiety radiating from him. The mood was sour. "20 minutes later, a second, far more discreet jet landed on the same tarmac. It was a sleek, unmarked Bombardier Global 7500, registered to a Shell corporation in Delaware. Ainsley stepped off the plane. She was not Ainsley. She was Anya. She wore black, wide-leg trousers, a simple silk shell, and oversized sunglasses. Her hair was loose. She carried no luggage save for a single unreleased Eora prototype briefcase. Javier was waiting for her on the tarmac beside a black armored Mercedes. "Welcome to Paris, Anya," he said, taking the briefcase. "The Rose jet landed 20 minutes ago," she said, sliding into the back seat. "Is he rattled?" "He's apoplectic," Javier reported with a thin smile. "His team has been trying to break through our firewall all morning. They are not very good. They're loud, crude, all brute force. He tried to get the personal number for the head of the Zurich firm. The firm, by the way, we own." "Good. Let him sweat," Ainsley said. "How is the venue?" "The Musée Rodin is locked down. The collection is secure. The models are in final fittings. Everything is perfect. And the finale look, it's waiting for you at the studio. It is a masterpiece." Ainsley looked out the window as the car sped toward the 8th arrondissement. She had spent the last 2 weeks living a lie, playing the part of the dutiful simple wife. She had packed her husband's bags so he could go on a romantic trip with his mistress. She had listened to him praise her Anya as a ruthless killer, while dismissing Ainsley as yogurt-brained. The humiliation of the gala had been a catalyst. It had burned away the last lingering traces of the woman she had been. The woman who had perhaps hoped Damien might one day see her. Now she didn't care if he saw her. She only cared that he recognized what he had lost. The Mercedes pulled into a subterranean garage. Ainsley was whisked into a private elevator that took her to the secret Ayura creative headquarters in Paris. It was a hive of activity. The next 36 hours were a blur of focused creative warfare. Ainsley was in her element. She was no longer the beige wallpaper. She was the architect. She approved lighting cues. She reordered the model lineup. She personally inspected every single one of the 40 looks, making microscopic adjustments with her own hands. "The tension on this zipper is wrong," she'd say, and an army of artisans would fly to fix it. "The audio needs more bass. I want the floor to vibrate. The lighting for the finale must be a single cold blue-white spotlight. I want it to look like a judgment." She was demanding, exacting, and completely in control. Her team, who revered her, worked without sleep. They would have followed her into battle. And in a way they were. The night before the show, Javier found her alone in the studio, standing before the final look. The suit, it was made of a sharkskin grey material that seemed to drink the light. The jacket was sharply tailored with a high, severe collar, and a waist so cinched it was almost violent. The trousers were wide, flowing like liquid metal. It was power incarnate. "He won't know what hit him," Javier said. "It's not for him," Ainsley said, her voice quiet. "Not really." She touched the sleeve of the suit. "He was right about one thing. He said I wasn't the face of the brand. He was right. Ainsley Rose is a nobody, a ghost. She's the plain wife he married for her non-threatening, old money but no power background." She turned to Javier. "Tomorrow, Ainsley Rose dies, and A is finally born." The gardens of the Musée Rodin had been transformed. A massive minimalist black structure had been erected over the famous rose bushes, creating an enclosed cathedral-like runway. The night was cold, but the anticipation was white-hot. This was the most impossible ticket of the decade. The arrival of the guests was a show in itself. Anna Wintour swept in her sunglasses firmly in place, giving a curt nod. Bernard Arnault, the CEO of LVMH and the king of luxury, took his seat. His presence alone, a sign that aura was the real deal. Celebrities: Timothée Chalamet, Kate Blanchett, Zendaya, filed in their faces masks of excited reverence. And then Damien Rose arrived. He was in his element, a king holding court. He wore his black tie suit, the one Ainsley had packed. Serafina was on his arm, poured into a glittering gold dress that left nothing to the imagination. The press exploded. Damien is Rose Capital, making a play for aura." "Serafina, are you the new face of the brand?" Damien just smiled a confident, wolfish grin. "We're all here to admire the art," he said, a perfect, ambiguous quote. He was seated in the front row exactly as Ainsley had planned. He was directly across from the most powerful editors, and crucially, his business rivals. He looked magnificent. He felt invincible. His momentary panic on the jet was gone. He was Damien Rose. He would not be denied. He leaned over to Serafina. "Look at this. He's got Arnaud and Pinot here. This A has them all running scared. It's beautiful." "I'm just so excited." Serafina breathed already, planning which pieces she would demand. The lights went down. A single heavy bass note dropped so low it shook the floor. Thump, 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 like a giant heartbeat. The show began. It was titled Metamorphosis. The first model, Gigi Hadid, emerged from the darkness. She wore a severe floor-length leather coat, tightly belted, making her look like a beautiful, dangerous spy. The collection that followed was breathtaking. It was not fashion, as Damien understood it. It wasn't loud or logo-heavy. It was armor. There were dresses that looked like sculpted steel jackets, with shoulders sharp enough to cut glass and boots that clicked on the runway with military precision. The colors were stark black charcoal silver and a deep bloody crimson. Damien was stunned. This wasn't handbags, as he'd condescendingly told Ainsley. This was power. This was a statement. He had to have this brand. It was a reflection of his own ruthless soul. The music swelled a frantic classical techno hybrid. The pace quickened. The final model, walking in a dress that looked like shattered obsidian, completed her pass. The music stopped. The lights went black. The audience held its collective breath. This was the moment. For 10 years, A had been a ghost. Now the ghost was about to appear. Damien leaned forward, his hands clasped, his heart pounding. He could already taste the victory, the headlines, the envy of his peers. Damien Rose acquires aura, a single cold blue-white spotlight, the one Ainsley had called judgment, snapped on, illuminating the head of the runway. A figure stood in the light back to the audience. And now, a disembodied voice echoed through the hall. For the first time, the founder, owner, and creative director of Aura. The figure turned. It was Ainsley. She was not Ainsley, not the beige wallpaper, not the plain wife in the simple black dress. This was A. She was wearing the suit, the shark-skin grey weaponized suit. Her hair was slicked back so severely it looked like a polished helmet. Her makeup was minimalist but stark, emphasizing her high cheekbones and the piercing intelligence in her eyes. She stood for a moment, her gaze sweeping the entire room. Her face devoid of any emotion except absolute, chilling control. The silence in the room was not just quiet. It was a vacuum, a collective global gasp. Anna Wintour, famously inscrutable, slowly removed her sunglasses. Bernard Arnault was leaning forward, his expression one of pure, unadulterated fascination. And Damien Rose froze. His world stopped. His brain implicitly refused to process the data. It was like seeing a statue weep. It was an impossibility. His smile, the one he had practiced in the mirror, was still plastered on his face, a grotesque, frozen mask. His eyes were wet, unblinking. No. No. It's a mistake. It's someone who looks like her. A model. A trick. Serafina beside him was the first to speak. Her voice was a small, confused whisper. Damien, is that? Ainsley began to walk. She didn't stroll. She didn't strut. She strode. Her heavy, custom-made boots clicked on the runway. Click, click, click. The sound was like a countdown. The flashes started. It wasn't the usual flurry of press. It was an explosion. A wall of white light, a sonic boom of 1,000 cameras trying to capture the impossible. A was Ainsley Rose. The wife. The invisible wife. Ainsley walked the entire length of the runway. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She walked as if she were reviewing troops before a battle. Damien's paralysis finally broke. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a sickly pale grey. His phone, which he had been holding to take a photo of A, slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. Ainsley reached the end of the runway, stopping directly in front of the photographer's pit, directly in front of her husband. She paused. Slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes cold and clear, moved past the photographers, past Serafina's horrified, open-mouthed stare, and locked directly onto Damien's. She held his gaze for 1 second, 2, 3. In her eyes he saw no anger, no pain, no love. He saw nothing. He saw a stranger. He saw a balance sheet that had just been zeroed out. He saw indifference. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. She gave a single short, sharp nod, acknowledgement, dismissal. Then she turned, and with the same measured, powerful pace, she walked back into the darkness. The show was over. For a full 5 seconds, the room was utterly silent. Then the applause began. It wasn't just clapping. It was a roar. A standing ovation from the most cynical, powerful people in the world. They were not just applauding a collection. They were applauding the reveal. The sheer, audacious, incredible gall of it. Damien remained seated. He was paralyzed. He couldn't feel his legs. "Damien," Serafina whispered her hand on his arm. He shook it off. Get your hand off me," he stammered. The lights came up. The room was chaos. People were on their feet, shouting, talking, moving. My God, it was her, his wife. Did you see his face? Damien's rivals, the ones he had been so proud to sit near, were looking at him. Not with envy, not with respect. They were looking at him with a mixture of pity and predatory hunger. They were smelling blood in the water. "Mr. Vance, Mr. Vance." A reporter from Women's Wear Daily was already there, shouting. "Was this a joint venture? How long have you known?" Damien couldn't speak. He just stared at the empty runway. Serafina, a creature of pure survival, saw the power shift. She saw the cameras on Damien capturing his grey-faced, slack-jawed shock. She saw Ainsley's victory. She stood up, smoothed her gold dress, and without a single word to the man she had arrived with, she vanished into the crowd. Damien Rose was for the first time in his life completely and utterly alone. The after-party was in a private salon within the Musée Rodin. The air thick with champagne and the electric buzz of the decade's greatest revelation. The room, which an hour ago had been full of mutual acquaintances, was now the most exclusive place on earth. The security at the door was no longer the museum's. It was a wall of men in black suits, all bearing the subtle silver A on their lapels. Aura security. Damien, moving in a fog of unreality, pushed through the departing crowd. He was a man possessed, driven by a primal need to confront the source of his cognitive dissonance. He had to get to her. He had to. What Yell demand answers negotiate. He didn't have a plan. He just had to make the world make sense again. He reached the velvet rope. A large man with the impassive face of a presidential guard put a hand up. "Sir, your name?" Damien's entire identity was built on never having to answer that question. "I'm Damien Rose," he said, his voice raw. I'm her husband." The word, once a statement of possession, now tasted like ash. The guard scanned a tablet. He looked up, his face as blank and hard as a marble wall. "Mr. Rose is not on the list. You are not permitted entry." The word struck Damien with the force of a physical blow. Not on the list. He who was the list. "Not on the... I am her husband," he roared, his voice cracking. The composure the ironclad Rose control finally shattered, and a raw, infantile rage poured out. The commotion attracted attention. The crowd around them quieted, phones discreetly rising. The door to the salon opened, and Javier stepped out. He was wearing a perfectly cut Aora suit, his silver goatee neatly trimmed. He looked powerful. Javier. Damien's mind reeled trying to place him. This was Ainsley's coffee friend, the mild-mannered art consultant she met for lunch. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Let me in." Javier looked at Damien, not with anger, but with a kind of clinical pity. "Mr. Rose, my name is Javier Milan. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Aura." Damien's jaw hung slack. COO. He'd been complaining about his wife's unemployed friend for years. "I am here to ask you to leave," Javier said, his voice as cold and precise as Ainsley's runway. "You are causing a scene." "I am not leaving until I speak to my wife," Damien spat, jabbing a finger past him. "Mrs. Rose," Javier corrected the change in title, a deliberate chilling cut, "is busy. She is in fact speaking with Mr. Arnaud." Through the opened door, Damien had a clear view. It was a tableau from his worst nightmare. Ainsley Anya stood in the center of a circle of the most powerful people in global luxury. She was wearing the shark-skin suit, holding a glass of champagne, and she was laughing. It was a light, genuine laugh, something he hadn't heard in years. She was incandescent, the true center of gravity, while Bernard Arnault, the wolf in cashmere himself, listened with rapt attention. "Ainsley!" Damien shouted a desperate, wounded animal sound. The laughter in the room stopped. Every head turned. Ainsley heard him. Her smile did not falter, but it tightened. She paused, looked over the heads of the billionaires and editors, and her eyes met Javier's. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. No. It was a non-verbal command. "He is irrelevant. Handle it." Then she turned back to Mr. Arnaud, apologized for the interruption, and resumed her conversation as if a fly had momentarily buzzed at the window. She had dismissed him, utterly. That single tiny gesture broke something deep inside Damien. "Sir," the guard said, no longer asking. He put a heavy, unyielding hand on Damien's chest. "You must leave. Now." Damien, the corporate raider, the shark, the king, felt the pressure of the guard's hand. He was being handled. He looked at Javier, who just watched, his face impassive. He looked at the closed-off world of the party, a world that had been his, which was now hers. Defeated, humiliated, and utterly, profoundly broken, Damien allowed himself to be escorted, pushed away from the door. He was maneuvered back through the crowd, a gauntlet of whispers and stares, past the main entrance and out into the cold Paris night. The press, smelling the blood, descended. "Damien, is it true she's been running the company for 10 years? Were you an investor? Is Rose Capital involved? Mr. Rose, is your marriage a fraud?" He stumbled onto the curb, blinded by the flashes. His car, the Maybach he had arrived in, was gone. Serafina, a creature of pure parasitic survival, had recognized the exact moment the tide had turned and had predictably abandoned the sinking ship. He stood alone on the pavement, the man who thought he was acquiring the world, with no way to even get back to his hotel. The next 24 hours were a financial bloodbath. Damien's journey home was not on the G800. The jet, he learned from a frantic, weeping assistant, had been grounded. The loan on it, held by a subsidiary of a Swiss bank, had been called. The plane was an asset of Rose Capital, and Rose Capital was in freefall. He flew commercial in a middle seat in business class, an indignity that felt like a physical illness. His phone, normally a symphony of demands, was terrifyingly silent. The friends he had cultivated, the rivals he had intimidated, all gone. The only messages were a stream of panicked, terrified texts from his analysts and a single ice-cold email from his bank's legal team formally demanding a call. The headlines were not just articles. They were obituaries for his reputation. Forbes, the Rose Deception. How the world's hottest luxury brand was built by an invisible wife. Wall Street Journal. Rose Capital deal for Lux Eterna. Implodes as Aura founder revealed. Vogue. A is for Anya and for absolute. The story had been pieced together with horrifying speed. Ainsley Anya Rose, sole founder and creative director. Aura, her singular creation. And the final killing blow, Lux Eterna, the obscure fund Damien had been ruthlessly targeting, had been quietly acquired by Aura's parent holding company a week ago. Damien Rose hadn't been a buyer. He had been a supplicant. He had been arrogantly pitching to his own wife's board. And they, as Javier had reported, had found his bid insulting. Rose Capital's stock, which was intrinsically tied to Damien's personal brand of infallible genius, plummeted 41% at the opening bell. It was a rout. His investors, furious at being made to look like fools, were already forming a committee. They were calling for his resignation. He was toxic. He finally arrived at the cold white penthouse. The key still worked. He stepped inside the silence of the massive apartment pressing in on him. "Ainsley," he called out. His voice was hoarse. She was there. Not in the back bedroom, but in the grand living room. She wasn't wearing the Aura power suit. She was in her Ainsley uniform, simple dark jeans and a grey cashmere sweater. She was carefully placing a small framed photo into a cardboard box. A wave of desperate, pathetic relief washed over him. The Anya nightmare was over. This was his Ainsley. The plain one. The one who managed the house. The one he could control. "Ainsley," he said, his voice hardening as he tried to reclaim his power. What was that show in Paris? What the hell did you do? You humiliated me." Ainsley didn't look up. She carefully wrapped a small, abstract sculpture in bubble wrap, her hands steady. "I humiliated you?" she asked, her voice calm, conversational. "That's an interesting perspective." This is insane," he raved, stalking into the room. "You built a company behind my back, a handbag company." "Yes," she said, placing the sculpture in the box. He felt the familiar surge of righteous anger. He was on solid ground now. This was business. This was law. "While married to me, Ainsley, do you have any idea what you've done? That's my company. That's community property. Half of Iora is mine." This was it, the final negotiation. He could still salvage this. He'd lost the battle, but he would win the war. He'd take half. He'd take control. He'd save her from this. A small, cruel smile touched his lips. He still had her. Ainsley finally stopped packing. She placed her hands on the edge of the cardboard box and straightened up. She turned to him, her face not angry, not sad, just patient, like a teacher about to explain a very simple concept to a very slow child. "Do you remember our prenuptial agreement, Damien?" she asked. He hesitated, the smile faltering. "Of course. Standard. Your lawyers talked to my lawyers. It protects my assets from you." He said it with a remaining flicker of pride. "Yes, it does." She agreed, her voice gentle. It protects all premarital assets. And it also protects, and I quote, all businesses' profits and entities created independently during the marriage, provided no marital funds were commingled. She walked to the sterile white desk where he had signed so many billion-dollar deals. She picked up a single leather-bound file. You were very proud of it, she continued, walking back toward him. You told me it was ironclad to protect you from me. She opened the file. You funded Rose Capital with your trust fund, a premarital asset. I funded Eora with my grandmother's inheritance, a premarital asset. You called it pin money, Damien. You told me to buy a nice painting. She laid the file on the box. You were so dismissive of my little hobby that you never once thought to ask about it. You never once thought to include it in our joint filings because you didn't think it was real. You didn't think I was real. She tapped the last page, the signature page. This is Appendix B, Aura Holdings SARL. Your signature is right next to it. You signed it Damien. You signed it without reading it, because you looked at me and you saw nothing. Damien's legs gave out. He gripped the back of a white Eames chair to hold himself up. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a sickly pale grey. It's all mine, Ainsley said, her voice not triumphant, just factual. Aura, the holding company, Lux Eterna. She paused as if remembering a final item on a grocery list. And as of this morning, the bank that holds the primary note on Rose Capital. After today's stock collapse, your company is in breach of its loan covenants. My holding company acquired that debt from the bank. We are calling in the loan you personally guaranteed. He stared at her, his mind a howling void. It wasn't just that he didn't get her money. It was that she was actively, legally, and permanently taking his. You're ruining me, he whispered the words, barely audible. No, Ainsley said, turning back to her box and picking up the roll of packing tape. You ruined yourself. You just didn't realize it because you were too busy looking in the mirror. She taped the box shut, the sound of the tape ripping through the silence like a scream. But why? He whispered, his voice finally breaking. The bluster was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was a hollow, terrified confusion. Why this? Why do all this? Ainsley picked up the box. She paused at the door, her back to him. She didn't turn around. You mocked me, Damien, she said, her voice quiet but echoing in the vast empty room. You mocked me for being practical. You humiliated me at the gala. You called me wallpaper. You were right. I am practical. I'm practical enough to know that a woman should always have her own power, and I am wallpaper. She finally turned her eyes clear and cold, locking onto his, the kind that holds up the entire crumbling house. She turned to leave. The finality of the act hit him. Ainsley, wait. Please, he begged, stumbling after her. He was weeping now, ugly, desperate sobs. Don't go, I love you, I see you now. This was his last pathetic gamble. The plea. Ainsley stopped at the elevator, her finger on the button. She looked back at him, the great Damien Rose, a broken, terrified man in a crumpled suit, weeping in his white tomb. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, she saw the man she had once loved. A flicker of the old Ainsley, a deep, ancient sadness crossed her eyes. No, Damien, she said softly, her voice filled with a terrible final pity. You don't see me. You just see A. And she is not interested in you. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. The doors slid shut, leaving him alone in the cold white mausoleum. A billionaire in name, only a king with no subjects, and a husband with no wife. The story of Ainsley Rose is a reminder that the people the world dismisses as wallpaper are often the ones holding the building together. What did you think of Damien's shocking downfall? Was Ainsley's revenge a cold, calculated masterpiece or a necessary act of liberation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories about justice, hidden power, and seeing the arrogant get what they deserve, then please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel. You won't want to miss the stories we have coming up next.